The rain over Chicago did not bring life. It washed the thick, industrial soot from the brick tenements of the South Side and dragged it into the overflowing gutters. Outside, the night was a drowning canvas of charcoal gray. Inside the sprawling, ultra-modern glass complex of St. Jude Imperial Hospital, however, the weather ceased to exist. The air was a sterile, freezing draft, strictly regulated at 64 degrees Fahrenheit, smelling heavily of isopropyl alcohol, industrial-grade bleach, and the faint, underlying ozone scent of burning electricity generated by the multi-million-dollar diagnostic machinery. Down in the subterranean basement, right beneath the massive hydraulic elevator shafts that kept the upper corporate floors humming, Raymond Vance stood in front of a stained, stainless steel mirror. Raymond was a 52-year-old black man who carried himself with a heavy, unyielding silence. His frame was tall, nearly 6'3", but slightly slouched from a decade of lifting heavy biohazard disposal canisters and pushing commercial-sized mop buckets. His hair was a short, coarse silver and black buzz cut, and his face was mapped with deep, weathered lines that told a story of profound, suffocating exhaustion. He was currently dressed in the faded, scratchy teal scrubs of a low-tier night-shift sanitary technician, a hospital janitor, whose sole responsibility was to scrub the fluid spills off the operating room floors after the wealthy surgeons had completed their shifts. His thick hands, now covered in yellow latex gloves, were calloused and rough. To the elite medical staff upstairs, he was simply the shadow with the mop, an invisible, uneducated laborer from the slums who cleared their waste for $12 an hour. But the human eye is easily blinded by a cheap uniform. 10 years ago, Dr. Raymond Vance was the premier neurosurgeon and biomolecular architect in the country, a man whose pioneering research on genetic cellular recovery had earned him a multi-billion-dollar medical empire, Vance International Health Systems. He was the absolute sovereign of the board, owning 70% of the private equity that funded 50 premium hospitals across the nation. But when a sudden, aggressive neurological condition struck his only son, Elijah, Raymond walked completely away from the corporate spotlight. He scrubbed his public profile from the internet, appointed a proxy board to run the corporate margins, and took a subterranean, entry-level job at this specific regional branch under a fabricated alias. He didn't want to rule from a penthouse skyscraper in Manhattan anymore. He wanted to be on the ground, in the dirt, breathing the same sterile air as his ailing boy, ensuring that the local medical system didn't exploit his child while he secretly worked on a molecular cure in his private home laboratory. Raymond pulled off the yellow latex gloves, throwing them into the biohazard bin with a quiet, deliberate sigh. He reached into his pocket and checked his cheap, cracked smartphone. It was 11:45 p.m. Elijah was currently admitted to room 408 on the high-security VIP floor, a placement Raymond paid for anonymously through an offshore corporate trust to ensure his son received the absolute highest tier of continuous telemetry monitoring. The boy was stable, but the internal hospital metrics showed that his white blood cell count had fluctuated dangerously over the last 12 hours. "Raymond, stop staring at the wall and get the industrial buffer up to the third-floor trauma bay," a voice barked harshly from the doorway. It was the night shift supervisor, a small, aggressive man named Miller who wore his minor administrative authority like a weapon. Miller sneered, tossing a dirty, chemical-soaked rag toward Raymond's chest. "The primary surgical staff just finished a private cosmetic procedure for a city councilman's wife. The floor is a mess. If there's a single speck of dried fluid left on the stainless steel when Chief Surgeon Sterling arrives for his midnight rounds, I'll personally deduct 3 hours from your timesheet. Move it." Raymond caught the rag deftly in his large hand. His amber eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, a dangerous, freezing depth flickering within them, a gaze that had once made corrupt pharmaceutical executives tremble in federal courtrooms. But he suppressed the fire, smoothing his rugged expression back into the blank, obedient mask of a tired laborer. "Right away, Mr. Miller," Raymond said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that carried a strange, heavy dignity the supervisor was too ignorant to understand. Raymond pushed the heavy industrial floor buffer out into the dimly lit, sterile white corridor. The machine chugged loudly against the polished linoleum, its steady, rhythmic vibration rattling his bones as he rode the service elevator up. He told himself this was the tax he paid to stay close to his son, to shield Elijah from the cold, commercial nature of modern medicine. But as the elevator doors slid open on the third floor, the The red emergency sirens above the main nursing station began to pulse with a sudden, deafening wail. The public address system crackled to life, a synthetic, mechanical voice repeating a code that turned Raymond's entire world into pure ice. Code red, room 408, cardiovascular call-ups. Repeat, code red, room 408. Elijah. Raymond dropped the handle of the industrial buffer, the massive machine crashing against the concrete wall with a loud, metallic clang. The janitor didn't walk. He erupted forward, his long legs eating the distance down the sterile corridor as his heart hammered violently against his ribs. The ordinary, aging worker had completely vanished, replaced by a father whose universe was about to collide with the absolute arrogance of the medical elite. The heavy double doors of the fourth-floor intensive care wing hissed open as Raymond tore through them, the frantic, erratic beep of a failing heart monitor guiding his steps like a siren. The sterile white environment had warped into a battlefield. Nurses were sprinting between storage lockers, clutching vials of epinephrine, their faces tight with the cold panic of a losing fight. Raymond arrived at room 408. Through the reinforced glass observation window, he saw his 12-year-old son, Elijah. The boy's chest was heaving weakly beneath a nest of multicolored monitoring wires, his skin pale gray under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Step back, janitor. You're contaminating the sterile field." A sharp, arrogant voice cut through the electronic alarm chimes. Standing at the foot of Elijah's bed was Dr. Alistair Sterling, the chief surgeon of St. Jude Imperial Hospital. Sterling was a man who looked like he had been manufactured for a luxury medical brochure. His silk-blend white lab coat was immaculate, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, and his wrist bore a platinum Patek Philippe watch that caught the harsh glare of the monitors. He was a celebrity doctor, a man whose private practice survived entirely on the multi-million-dollar donations of Chicago's ultra-wealthy. "What is his current ejection fraction?" Raymond demanded, stepping directly into the room. He forgot to lower his voice. He forgot the script of the submissive janitor. His eyes were locked onto the central telemetry screen, his medical mind instantly calculating the arterial pressure lines. The telemetry shows a severe left ventricular block. He needs a high-dose infusion of milrinone and immediate surgical decompression. Why aren't you prepping the theater? Dr. Sterling froze, his scalpel hovering over a tray of sterile instruments. He turned slowly, looking at Raymond's faded, scratchy teal scrubs and the chemical-stained rag hanging from his pocket. A look of profound, mocking amusement crossed the surgeon's face. "Excuse me?" Sterling scoffed, dropping the instrument with a sharp metallic clatter. He stepped toward Raymond, using his superior height to look down his nose at the older black man. "Did the man with the mop just try to read my monitor? Miller, who let this sanitary worker up to the VIP wing? Get him out of my sight before I have him fired for practicing medicine without a brain." "The boy is dying, Dr. Sterling," Raymond said, his voice dropping into a low, resonant baritone that carried a terrifying, icy gravity. He didn't back up. He stood like an iron pillar. "Every second you waste debating my right to speak is a second his myocardium suffocates. Look at the arterial line. He is slipping into cardiogenic shock." "I know exactly what condition the patient is in," Sterling sneered, crossing his arms over his silk coat. He leaned against the marble counter, his tone dripping with a practiced, administrative cruelty. "But let's talk about reality, Artie. This patient is admitted under an anonymous private trust fund. 3 minutes ago, our billing department flagged the account. The quarterly trust transfer is experiencing a standard banking delay. The account is technically frozen. Under St. Jude Imperial policy, high-tier VIP cardiac suites and emergency surgical theaters are reserved strictly for fully cleared, premium insurance assets." Raymond's amber eyes narrowed into two slits of pure, lethal fire. "A banking delay? You are withholding a life-saving decompression procedure over a digital wire transfer latency?" "I am running a business, janitor," Sterling whispered, leaning close so only Raymond could hear the venom in his breath. "In 20 minutes, a private helicopter is landing on the roof. It is carrying Senator Montgomery's primary financial donor, who requires an elective arterial stent. That man pays my salary. He pays for the light bulbs in this hallway. This boy's anonymous trust fund is broke, which means he is no longer a VIP. He is a charity case, and I don't open my surgical theater for charity." Behind them, Elijah's heart monitor gave a long, terrifying, continuous beep as the green line flattened. Nurses gasped. Raymond's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces of pure, raw agony. He looked at his son, then turned back to look at the man who wore the white coat of a healer but possessed the soul of an executioner. The lines were drawn. The corporate elite had just signed their own death warrant, and Raymond's hand was already moving toward the shadow network. He's bradying down. Heart rate is 40, 35. A nurse screamed, her hands shaking as she grabbed a manual resuscitation bag and hooked it to Elijah's oxygen mask. The rhythmic, frantic beep, beep, beep of the monitor was slowing down, transforming into the flat, continuous tone of absolute mortality. Prep the manual defibrillator, Raymond commanded, his voice slicing through the room with the explosive force of a military commander. He stepped past Dr. Sterling, his massive, calloused hand shoving the chief surgeon aside with effortless physical power. Sterling stumbled backward, his platinum Patek Philippe watch clattering violently against the stainless steel tray of instruments. "What do you think you're doing? Touch me again, and I will have you prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Security. Code Gray in room 408. Get this maniac off my floor." Raymond ignored him entirely. His mind had locked into a state of absolute, surgical hyperfocus, the elite intellect of the country's greatest neurosurgeon overriding his grief. He ripped the yellow latex gloves out of his pocket, snapped them onto his thick hands, and took the defibrillator paddles from the terrified nurse. "Charge to 100 joules," Raymond said, his tone icy, calm, and utterly dominant. "Clear." "You don't have the authority," Sterling yelled. "Clear," Raymond roared, his amber eyes flashing with a terrifying ancient fire. He drove the paddles down onto his son's frail chest. Thud. Elijah's body arched slightly off the mattress as the electrical current surged through his myocardium. The monitor stuttered. The flat green line fractured, jumping erratically before settling back into a weak, slow, but steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Vitals are stabilizing, but his pressure is still bottoming out, the nurse whispered, staring at Raymond with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. She had never seen a janitor operate a crash cart with the flawless, automated muscle memory of a veteran chief of medicine. Before Raymond could speak, the glass doors of the VIP wing burst open. 3 heavily armed hospital security guards, their batons drawn and tactical vests strapped tight, swarmed into the room, led by the night shift supervisor, Miller. "There he is! Secure the asset." Miller pointed a trembling finger at Raymond. "He's assaulting the surgical staff." Dr. Sterling straightened his silk-blend lab coat, his face flushed red with a mixture of intense humiliation and narcissistic rage. He looked at the security guards, then at Raymond, his eyes narrowing into 2 slits of pure corporate venom. "Stand down, guards," Sterling said, his voice dropping into a dangerously smooth, quiet hiss. "Don't touch him yet. Let him look at his work." Sterling walked slowly over to the computer terminal at the nursing station right outside the glass wall. He tapped his gold fountain pen against the glass window, looking at Raymond like an apex predator looking at an insect trapped in a jar. "You think you're a hero, Artie?" Sterling sneered, his voice projecting through the intercom system into the room. "You just performed an unauthorized medical intervention on a non-cleared patient while wearing the uniform of a sanitary worker. That isn't a rescue. That's a class of felony. I was going to let your son stay in this room until the morning out of professional pity, but now, you just broke the chain of command." Sterling entered his administrator security password into the terminal, his thumb striking the keys with absolute, malicious satisfaction. "I am officially signing the immediate, emergency eviction and transfer order for patient Elijah Vance," Sterling announced. The printer beside the desk whirred to life, spitting out a crisp, white sheet of paper bearing the hospital's official seal. "Because of your violent, erratic behavior, this patient is being downgraded to a non-insured, high-risk liability. We are transferring him via basic, non-emergency city ambulance to the county public clinic across town. They have an 8-hour wait time in the hallway. Let's see how long his myocardium lasts on a rusted gurney." "He won't survive the transport, Sterling," Raymond said. He didn't yell this time. His voice dropped into a terrifyingly quiet, hollow stillness that made the temperature in the corridor feel like pure ice. He walked out of the room, standing inches away from the chief surgeon. "You are violating the Hippocratic Oath. You are committing premeditated murder for a corporate metric." The Hippocratic oath doesn't pay for the electricity in this building, janitor, Sterling whispered, leaning close, his breath smelling of expensive espresso. He took the printed eviction order and shoved it hard against Raymond's chest. I am the law in this hospital. A man who cleans the floors has no right to question the architecture. Take your dying boy and get off my property before I have the police throw you into a holding cell. Raymond caught the paper. He looked at the official signature of Dr. Alistair Sterling, then looked up at the pristine, white ceiling of the hospital he had built with his own blood, sweat, and genius. The system was completely dead. The House of Healing had turned into a slaughterhouse of greed. You're right, Alistair, Raymond said, a small, chilling, and completely unreadable smile touching the corners of his lips. His amber eyes burned with an untouchable, absolute sovereignty. A man who cleans the floors knows exactly where the trash is hidden. Enjoy your throne for the next 60 minutes, because at midnight, the owner is taking back the keys. The fluorescent lights of the fourth-floor corridor hummed with a cold, relentless vibration that felt like a countdown. In Raymond's thick, calloused hands, the printed eviction order felt as heavy as a gravestone. The official, ink-stamped signature of Chief Surgeon Alistair Sterling was sharp and neat, a flawless bureaucratic mark that effectively condemned a 12-year-old boy to death. Outside the panoramic windows, the Chicago rain slammed against the thick safety glass, mirroring the violent storm raging inside Raymond's chest. Sir, the City Transport Dispatch just logged the request, a young nurse whispered, slipping out of room 408. Her voice was trembling, her eyes darting nervously toward the end of the hallway where Supervisor Miller and 3 security guards stood like vultures. The city ambulance they assigned to Elijah, it's a basic transport unit. It doesn't have an advanced life support matrix or a mobile telemetry relay. If his ventricular block collapses again while they are stuck in the midnight gridlock on the interstate, he won't make it to the county clinic. Raymond did not look down at her. His amber eyes were fixed on his son through the glass. Elijah's chest was rising and falling in shallow, desperate rhythms, the green lines on the monitor ticking slowly like a clock running out of battery. How long do we have before the transfer team arrives? Raymond asked. His voice was no longer that of the submissive janitor, nor was it the furious roar from moments ago. It had transformed into a terrifying, hollow stillness, the absolute quiet of a general measuring a battlefield before the final execution strike. 60 minutes, sir, the nurse said, her voice dropping into a breathless panic. Dr. Sterling ordered the bed to be fully cleared by 12:45 a.m. Senator Montgomery's primary donor has already cleared the helipad pad customs on the roof. They are preparing the VIP suite right now. Raymond slowly folded the eviction paper, sliding it into the pocket of his faded teal scrubs. He looked up a pristine, blindingly white ceiling of the hospital. Every single piece of equipment in this wing, every automated diagnostic terminal, every copper wire buried within the walls had been engineered based on his private blueprints. 10 years ago, he had built Vance International Health Systems to be a cathedral of unconditional healing, a shield to protect human life from the predatory greed of traditional healthcare networks. But looking at the security guards holding their batons, looking at the nurses who were too terrified of losing their corporate salaries to defy a corrupt surgeon, Raymond realized a devastating truth. The architecture he created had been infested from within. The blue shield he had designed to save lives had been weaponized by elitists who traded heartbeats for profit margins. 60 minutes, Raymond murmured to himself, a slow, chilling grin cutting through the weathered lines of his face. It was an untouchable, absolute look of corporate sovereignty. That is 59 minutes more than I need to dismantle this entire house. He turned on his heel, his scuffed work shoes clicking heavily against the immaculate linoleum as he walked away from the VIP suite. Supervisor Miller stepped into his path, his small chest puffed out as he tapped his walkie-talkie. Chik-Tung Lee. Where do you think you're going, RT? Dr. Sterling said you stay under guard until the city ambulance takes your kid. You don't leave this floor. Raymond didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. He simply kept walking forward, his massive 6'3" frame carrying an immovable kinetic authority. As he neared the supervisor, Raymond's amber eyes locked onto Miller's face with such a piercing, lethal intensity that the small man's breath instantly caught in his throat. Miller instinctively stepped backward, his heel catching on a trash bin as he nearly fell over. The 3 security guards reached for their belts. but their instincts screamed at them to stay frozen. There was something terrifyingly royal about the janitor's stride, a presence that belonged to a king walking through a den of thieves. Raymond bypassed them without a word, stepping into the staff service elevator at the end of the hall. As the industrial steel doors slid shut, separating him from the flashing sirens of the cardiac wing, he pulled his cheap, cracked smartphone from his pocket. He didn't use the standard network. He swiped his thumb across a hidden, encrypted partition on the screen, bringing up a stark interface that required a biometric retinal scan. The red laser light from the screen reflected in his eyes as a single line of text illuminated. Master node initialization. Access key IE Alpha 1 detected. Julian, Raymond spoke into the receiver, his voice deep, resonant, and dripping with an icy finality. The local administration at St. Jude Imperial has declared my son a non-insured liability. Chief Surgeon Sterling has signed an emergency eviction order to protect owner Metric. On the other end of the encrypted satellite line, the executive assistant to the Supreme Board of Vance International gasped, the sound of breaking porcelain clear in the background. My God, Chairman Vance, we were told the account anomalies were simple system latencies. Do you want me to mobilize the corporate legal division? No, Raymond said, his hand tightening around the cheap plastic casing of the phone until it groaned under his grip. The lawyers operate in the light. Tonight, we purge this structure from the dark. I am descending to the subterranean server core right now. I want the federal marshals mobilized, and I want the Supreme Medical Board on a live broadcast relay by midnight. Dr. Sterling wants to see how a man who cleans the floors handles architecture. Let's show him what happens when the architect decides to demolish the throne. The elevator slammed to a halt at the lowest basement level, the cold, forgotten concrete underbelly of the hospital. Raymond stepped out into the shadows, leaving the helpless father behind. The 60-minute clock was ticking, and the execution of the medical elite had officially begun. The service elevator plummeted into the deepest guts of St. Jude Imperial Hospital, the mechanical groan of the cables echoing like a dying beast. When the heavy steel doors slid open at basement level 4, the freezing, clinical scent of isopropyl alcohol vanished, replaced by the heavy, suffocating smell of damp concrete, industrial cooling fans, and high-voltage ozone. This was the forgotten foundation of the complex, the labyrinth of pipes, high-capacity electrical grids, and the central mainframe that regulated every digital breath the hospital took. Raymond stepped into the dimly lit corridor, his scuffed janitor shoes clicking rhythmically against the rough, unfinished concrete. In his faded teal scrubs, he looked like a wandering ghost, but his stride carried the cold, absolute weight of a sovereign returning to his kingdom. He walked past rows of massive humming backup generators until he reached a heavily reinforced titanium door. A matte black security console glowed next to it, pulsating with a restrictive crimson light. Above the scanner, a stark sign read, Restricted Compliance Area, Maximum Secure Data Center. Authorized management division only. Raymond didn't stop. He reached into the waistband of his scratchy uniform trousers and pulled out a small, metallic cylindrical object, a military-grade bypass injector given only to the supreme architects of Vance International. He unscrewed the cap, revealing a gold-plated data node, and slotted it directly into the maintenance port hidden beneath the biometric scanner. The crimson light on the security console stuttered violently. For 3 seconds, the digital system attempted to fight the foreign intrusion, its internal firewalls flashing warning signs across the central administration network upstairs. But the code running through the gold node wasn't malware. It was the original, indestructible source code of the entire medical empire, the digital DNA that Raymond himself had encrypted a decade ago. The console gave a low, sub-audible hum, and the flashing crimson bar dissolved into a pristine, steady platinum blue. The heavy magnetic locks hissed open with a loud release of pneumatic pressure. Raymond pushed the heavy titanium door open and stepped inside the server core. The room was a cathedral of blinking LED lattices. Row after row of black mainframe towers stretched into shadows, their massive cooling fans roaring with a deafening, industrial wind that whipped against Raymond's scratchy uniform. The air here was brutally cold, maintained at exactly 40 degrees Fahrenheit to keep the high-frequency processors from burning out. This server core processed 3 billion packets of medical telemetry, every second billing cycles, prescription registries, surgical schedules, and corporate insurance evaluations for 50 hospitals. Raymond marched directly to the master terminal, an isolated obsidian desk sitting at the very center of the server grid. He sat down on the simple metal stool, his large, grease-stained fingers hovering over the slick glass surface of the control panel. With 3 rapid, authoritative strokes of his hand, he cleared the local administrative operating system. The colorful, modern interface designed for the hospital's regional directors vanished. The monitor turned pitch black, replaced by a single, pulsing green command prompt that had remained dormant for 10 years. Raymond pulled his cheap, cracked smartphone from his pocket, connected it to the terminal via a fiber optic patch cord, and leaned forward. The green light of the monitor reflected in his amber eyes, casting an ancient, dangerous glow over the weathered lines of his face. System initialized, Raymond murmured to the empty, roaring room. His voice was entirely devoid of emotion, hard as diamond. Execute Global Command Protocol, Alpha 01, Remedy. On the monitor, strings of emerald data began to cascade downward like an unstoppable waterfall, completely bypassing the security blocks of the local IT department, the regional directors, and the chief surgeon's private network. Raymond wasn't just logging into a computer, he was taking back the steering wheel of the entire machine. A tiny notification window blinked on the edge of the terminal. 60-minute countdown. 42 minutes remaining until emergency eviction transit. 42 minutes, Alistair, Raymond whispered, his eyes narrowing into a lethal focus as his hands flew across the interface, pulling up Dr. Sterling's private financial records, his hidden pharmaceutical kickback ledgers, and the encrypted footage of his private medical discrimination logs. You told me a man who cleans the floors has no right to question the architecture. Now, let's see how you survive when the architect locks you inside your own cage. He struck the final confirmation key. Deep within the mainframe, an unshakable, subterranean digital command was unleashed, ripping upward through the hospital's networks like a lightning bolt, ready to freeze the empire in its tracks. The digital shockwave unleashed from basement level 4 did not hit St. Jude Imperial Hospital with a sound, but with the terrifying synchronization of an absolute execution. Upstairs on the 4th floor VIP wing, the frantic chimes of the cardiac monitors suddenly froze. Dr. Alistair Sterling was in the middle of counting down the minutes, until Senator Montgomery's primary donor landed on the roof when the tablet in his hand went dead. The slick, multicolored metrics of his private patient registry vanished, replaced by a blinding flash of pure white screen that illuminated his expensive, stylized glasses. What is the meaning of this? Sterling barked, shaking the tablet as if it were a broken toy. Miller, did the IT department trigger a mandatory security patch during my rounds? Before the night supervisor could scramble to find his walkie-talkie, a long, deep mechanical hum echoed through the walls. Every single electronic lock on the 4th floor engaged simultaneously with a sound like a gunshot. The heavy glass security doors sealing off the VIP wing hissed shut, their digital entry pads bleeding from a standard green into a solid, unyielding crimson. The elevators died. The ventilation grid choked, dropping its heavy roar into a suffocating, dead silence. Dr. Sterling, the main server frame is rejecting our administration codes, a nurse cried out from the central desk, her fingers frantically stabbing at a keyboard that was throwing back nothing but encrypted strings of data. The backup lines are dead. We are entirely locked inside the ward. Calm down, you fools, Sterling sneered, though a drop of cold sweat broke through his immaculate, gelled hairline. He marched toward the central wall monitor, his platinum Patek Philippe watch catching the harsh glare of the frozen screens. It's a temporary system latency. I'll call the regional director directly from my personal. The surgeon's words died in his throat. Every single television screen in the VIP suites, every telemetry monitor at the nursing stations, and every digital display inside the operating theaters across the entire multi-billion-dollar complex blinked in unison. The corporate logo of St. Jude Imperial dissolved. In its place, a crisp, high-definition global broadcast feed overrode the entire network architecture. The video feed did not show a standard corporate announcement. It displayed a massive, split-screen ledger of raw, unedited financial files. On the left side were Dr. Alistair Sterling's private offshore banking records, highlighting millions of dollars in untaxed, highly illegal kickbacks from a predatory pharmaceutical conglomerate. On the right side, a scrolling log of encrypted internal emails written by Sterling himself surfaced meticulous, cold-blooded directives instructing his sub-managers to intentionally alter the triage metrics of low-income patients, falsify insurance denials, and forcefully evict non-profitable assets from the emergency wards to protect his luxury profit margins. This is an illegal breach, Sterling gasped, his face turning an ash-gray color as he stared at his entire life's corruption being weaponized against him on a public screen. Who is doing this? Stop the feed! Look at the top of the monitor, doctor, a nurse whispered, her voice completely paralyzed by sheer terror. Floating above the cascading evidence of Sterling's malpractice was a pristine, platinum seal that every medical professional in the country recognized with absolute dread. It wasn't the badge of a hacker. It was the supreme digital master signature of Vance International Health Systems Access Code Alpha 1 REMD. Below the seal, a live ticker showed that the entire broadcast, along with every single byte of financial and medical fraud, had just been legally dispatched to the Federal Department of Health, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Supreme Medical Board via an unshakable, automated corporate compliance mandate. A tiny, mechanical chime echoed through the ceiling speakers, and the synthetic, automated voice of the hospital's central mainframe cut through the screaming panic of the staff. The midnight audit is now active. All local administrative privileges been permanently revoked by order of the chairman, retrieval paradigm commencing in 10 minutes. Sterling stumbled backward, his hand catching the edge of the nurse's station to keep his knees from buckling. The absolute sovereignty he had wielded over this sterile empire for 15 years had been completely pulverized in less than 600 seconds. He looked down at the paper eviction order still lying on the counter, then looked toward the heavy, locked service elevator at the end of the hall. A shadow was rising from the underbelly of the castle, and the man who cleaned the floors was about to walk into the light as the ultimate judge. The lock on the heavy glass doors of the fourth-floor VIP did not just slide open, it disengaged with a loud, echoey hiss of pneumatic pressure that cut straight through the panicked whispers of the stranded medical staff. Dr. Alistair Sterling stood frozen behind the central nursing console, his fingers still clutching his dead smartphone. He had spent the last 9 minutes watching his entire multi-million-dollar empire of pharmaceutical kickbacks and falsified medical records loop continuously across every digital screen in the facility. His face was a hollow mask of sweat and terror, his perfectly coiffed silver hair now damp and messy. Then the service elevator at the end of the long hall chimed. The heavy steel doors split open, and Raymond Vance stepped out into the bright fluorescent light. He was still wearing the faded, scratchy teal scrubs of a night shift sanitary worker. His work shoes were still covered in a thin layer of basement dust, and the chemical-stained rags still hung from his pocket, but his slouch was completely gone. He walked with his spine perfectly straight, his massive 6'3" frame radiating a quiet, crushing kinetic authority that made every nurse and assistant instinctively back away against the walls. But he was no longer alone. Flanking Raymond on either side were 4 federal marshals dressed in dark tactical vests, their badges gleaming under the lights. Walking directly behind them was the regional director of the State Medical Licensing Board, alongside 3 senior attorneys from the Federal Corporate Compliance Division, their faces grim and professional. "Doi, what is the meaning of this?" Supervisor Miller stammered, stepping forward with his walkie-talkie as he tried to protect his chief surgeon. "This janitor is under an official security detention. He assaulted Dr. Sterling." One of the federal marshals didn't even look at Miller. He drove his hand forward, flashing a stamped federal warrant directly in the supervisor's face. "Federal marshals, step back, sir. Do not interfere with a supreme corporate execution." Raymond marched straight past the guards, his amber eyes locking onto Alistair Sterling. He walked around the marble podium, casually pulling up a high-backed leather executive chair, the exact seat Sterling used during his luxury morning briefs, and sat down. The contrast was magnificent, an ordinary black laborer in dirty scrubs, sitting in the highest seat of power, looking down at the celebrity doctor. "Alistair," Raymond said, his voice a low, deep baritone that filled the silent corridor like the rumble of thunder. Your 60 minutes are officially up." You did this?" Sterling gasped, his hands shaking violently as he pointed a trembling finger at the man in teal scrubs. "This is a cyber-terrorist breach. I don't care what kind of old legacy codes you stole from the basement, Artie. You are a sanitary worker. You are an uneducated nobody. You cannot destroy my license based on a deepfake video loop." The regional director of the medical board stepped forward, tossing a thick, leather-bound folder onto the marble desk right in front of Sterling. "It isn't a deepfake, Dr. Sterling," the director said, his voice dropping like an iron anvil. 10 minutes ago, the supreme mainframe of Vance International Health Systems executed an automated internal audit under the personal biometric signature of the chairman of the board. Every single byte of data currently flashing on these monitors is officially verified, legally certified, and has already been processed by the state prosecutor's office. Sterling's breath caught in his throat, his eyes darting frantically between the federal marshals and the platinum seal glowing on the monitor above his head, chairman of the board. His brain scrambled desperately, trying to connect the dots, trying to understand how a multi-billion-dollar medical pioneer could be standing in his hospital dressed like a janitor. "No," Sterling whispered, his knees finally buckling as he fell backward against the medical charts cabinet, his face turning an ash-gray color. "No, it's impossible. The chairman, Dr. Raymond Vance, he's been in seclusion in Europe for 10 years. He's a ghost." Raymond leaned forward, resting his thick, calloused hands on the desk. He reached down to his pocket, pulled out the white, ink-stamped eviction order Sterling had signed to sentence his son to death, and tossed it casually over the marble. "The architecture doesn't change just because you don't look at the foundation, Alistair," Raymond murmured, his amber eyes burning with a freezing, absolute finality. 10 years ago, I built this entire health system so that no father would ever have to watch his child die over an insurance metric. I came down into the dirt hangay to make sure my boy was safe from people like you, and tonight I found the rot." The grand administrative desk of the VIP wing, once a monument to Alistair Sterling's corporate vanity, had transformed into his judicial scaffold. The paper eviction order sat crumpled beneath Raymond's callous palm, a single, stained sheet that had attempted to trade a child's life for an executive bonus. "Guards," the federal marshal commanded, his voice cold and flat as he stepped forward, heavy steel handcuffs clicking open with a lethal, rhythmic sound. "Arrest the suspect." Dr. Sterling backed away until his custom silk-blend lab coat slammed hard against the glass viewing window of room 408. His hands shook violently as the marshals grabbed his wrists, the heavy metal cuffs snapping shut over his platinum Patek Philippe watch. The cold steel bit into his skin, a sudden, heavy weight that shattered his illusion of elite immunity. "You can't do this," Sterling screamed, his high society composure entirely disintegrating into a pathetic, high-pitched screech. He looked frantically at the silent nurses, his eyes wide with a wild, desperate terror. "Miller, call the corporate lawyers. Call the senior vice president. I am the chief surgeon of this facility. This janitor cannot violate my sovereign tenure." Supervisor Miller, however, did not move. He stood completely frozen in the corner of the corridor, his walkie-talkie slipping from his fingers and smashing against the polished linoleum. He looked at Raymond, who sat immovably in the high-backed executive chair, and then at the Platinum Master seal glowing across every security terminal in the building. The truth was an absolute, crushing physical force. The aging, ordinary worker he had spent months hanging insulting and deducting hours from was the supreme lord of their entire corporate universe. Miller's knees buckled, his chest heaving with cold sweat as he realized his career was being ground into dust alongside his master's. "Your corporate tenure was voided the exact microsecond you prioritized an insurance metric over a flatline, Alistair," Raymond said. He didn't stand up. He didn't need to. His deep, resonant baritone carried the finality of a judge passing an absolute sentence. "I built this empire to be a cathedral of healing, not a casino for your pharmaceutical kickbacks. You told me that a man who cleans the floors has no right to question the architecture. But you forgot that the man who cleans the floors is the only one who knows exactly where the rot is buried." Raymond turned his back on the weeping surgeon, his amber eyes locking onto the regional director of the state medical board. "Strip his license. Scrub his credentials from every digital registry nationwide. By sunrise, I want his name to be a toxic biohazard to any medical facility on Earth." Immediately, Chairman Vance, the director said, bowing his head with absolute, shaking reverence as the federal marshals forcefully dragged Alastair, Sterling, and Miller toward the service elevator. The sound of the doctor's pathetic begging echoed down the hall before the heavy steel doors slid shut, burying his legacy in the subterranean dark. The moment the wolves were cleared from the floor, a deep, rhythmic thumping sound began to vibrate through the panoramic glass windows of the intensive care wing. The heavy Chicago rain was suddenly sheared apart by the massive hydraulic downforce of a state-of-the-art corporate medical helicopter descending directly onto the hospital's roof helipad. The roof access doors burst open, and a team of 6 premier cardiothoracic specialists, men and women Raymond had personally flown in from the Johns Hopkins Research Corps, sprinted down the sterile corridor. They carried advanced mobile life support matrices, their movements a flawless, synchronized masterpiece of genuine ICO brilliance. "Dr. Vance," the lead specialist gasped, running into room 408 and dropping to one knee before the man in the dirty teal scrubs. "We received the Alpha Zo-1 telemetry override 30 minutes ago. The mobile decompression unit is deployed. We are ready to stabilize the patient." "Save my son," Raymond commanded softly, the absolute corporate king vanishing, leaving behind only a father whose heart was resting entirely on a 12-year-old boy's chest. "On our lives, sir," the specialist vowed. For 40 minutes, the VIP wing was transformed into a sanctuary of pure, unadulterated healing. Raymond stood right outside the glass window, his rough, grease-stained hand resting heavily against the pane as he watched the specialist deploy the cellular recovery serum he had engineered in his private laboratory. There were no financial ledgers, no insurance checks, no political donors blocking the door, just the absolute, sovereign power of medicine serving a human heart. The erratic chimes of the monitor slowly began to smooth out. The chaotic, failing green spikes settled into a pristine, rhythmic, and powerful cadence. Beep, beep, beep. The nurse stepped out of the room, wiping a tear from her eye as she looked at Raymond with a profound, quiet awe. "His ventricular block is completely cleared, Dr. Vance. His pressure is stabilizing. Elijah is going to make it." Raymond let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 10 long years. The heavy, suffocating weight that had slouched his shoulders vanished, his rugged features relaxing into a warm, emotional smile. He stepped into room 408, walking quietly to the side of the bed. He pulled off his yellow latex gloves, throwing them into the waste bin, and wrapped his thick, calloused hand around his son's small, warm fingers. Elijah's eyelashes fluttered open, his young eyes reflecting the soft, steady light of the monitors. He looked up at his father's teal scrubs, then at the platinum credentials pinned to his chest. "Dad," Elijah whispered weakly, a tiny smile touching his lips. You fixed the machine?" "I fixed it, son," Raymond murmured, his deep voice thick with an absolute, unshakable pride as he adjusted the clean blanket over his boy's shoulders. "The house is clean. The foundation is solid. Nobody is ever going to move you from this room again." The billionaire founder stood by his son's side as the morning sun finally broke through the Chicago mist, casting a brilliant, platinum light across the sterile white floor. He had walked through the underbelly of his own empire, wiped away the filth of greed with his own 2 hands, and proven to the elite world that a father's love was the ultimate, undisputed